Hello, and welcome back to the Grown Up Stable podcast. I'm your host, Philip Schmidt, and today's episode is about energy. So, in this episode, I've decided to bring in guest speaker Nathan Dobbs. Now, Nathan is a teacher, he is a husband, and a loving father. I've brought him onto this podcast because he's always a very energetic person. Every time you come up to him, he has a smile on his face and he's just ready to tackle whatever life brings at him. And so here's how that interview with Mr. Nathan went. Now, you are a husband, you are a father, and you are also a teacher. And your teachers, you have students contacting you past work hours. So how do you try to balance all those things and just stay energized throughout the day?
Well, first and foremost, I appreciate you inviting me to this podcast. I was really excited when you brought up the topic of energy. And I think that's something that does apply to me. I would probably describe myself as a very high energy person until I had kids. And I think that when we started a family, that's when I really had to be a little bit more intentional with how I keep that balance. But I think the topic of energy, a lot of people tend to think that this is one of those things that you just naturally have more energy than someone else. But I really think it's something you decide. And I think it's something that's more of a matter of the heart. So, for example, if I'm working at Best Buy, but I hate electronics, I'm going to walk in and just kind of slump my head over every day, be irritated and irritable with people. But when you find a profession, something that you really do love, it's almost like you're going downhill. And when you're driving a car downhill, it's like you have gravity that's giving you that momentum as opposed to driving uphill. And so that momentum is pretty much what that energy feels like when you're really doing something you're passionate about. So I think when it comes to balancing really your personal life, aka family, your friends, maybe even your faith, with the thing that you do as a profession, really and truly, I think it's do you want these things? And for me, the reason I went into education is it really and truly allows me to be a present, loving, supportive husband and father, and most importantly, a Christian too. So I think it's really just a matter of the heart. And I think before someone gets married, I think they need to really search their heart and ask themselves, is this what I really want? Or do I really want children? Or is this profession really something that I'm interested in going into? So kind of like giving you that visual of driving downhill and giving that momentum, that's what desire can do for you. If it's something that you want, that energy kind of happens naturally.
Okay. You talked about people being energetic. Everyone kind of gravitates towards energetic people. Say you're looking for leadership, say you're looking for a relationship with someone, or you're looking for an employee to hire. Why do you think being energetic is such an attractive quality?
I think it goes a lot deeper than just someone who is walking around work and getting things done. I think more often than not, I don't want to speak in super broad terms and apply this to every single person that has high energy. But from what I have observed in my line of work and just in my personal life, people with high energy, there's kind of like a deeper reason. There's a why behind that. You often find that people who are doing something that they love, or they're excited, or they have energy to accomplish tasks left or right, there's something deeper happening there. And I think that people of energy are actually happy people. Like, I don't think you would go to the gym and see someone crushing it on a treadmill being wildly depressed or anxious. And that's kind of my thought. And I think people are attracted to high energy people because they know that there's a why there, that there's something kind of pumping that energy into their blood. I don't mean like physically, I just mean figuratively speaking, that they're excited and people kind of want a piece of that puzzle or a piece of that pie. That I don't want to say they're envious, but it's something attractive about that person that they want to harness that themselves overall. So, and it's contagious too. When you talk to someone who is high energy, it can rub off on your energy as well. It's like when you hear effective preaching or you hang out with a friend who is overwhelmingly positive, you walk away feeling like that was worth my time. That's how those people are.
For you specifically, would you say that energy is more of like a physical, mental, or emotional thing for you?
I think it's all three. And
All
I hate to
three.
give you that answer.
No, I mean that's a great answer.
I think when it comes to that, energy, I think the physical aspect of it, it is literally dependent on, of course, things like sleep and diet. And having been an athlete myself, there were times where I didn't get enough sleep the night before a track meet or something like that. And you do feel that pull, something that's hard to deal with. I think the mental aspect, there have been times in my life where I felt myself be not as, I would say, positive in my own mind, and it can actually drain your outlook on life. So I've got an assistant principal who has actually taught me to, he calls it promoting the positive, because there's just a lot of stuff that happens on a daily basis, not just at work, but in life. And you can bring bring that home to your wife and kids, or your friends, and just kind of suck the life out of everybody else. So I think physical in regard to literally how you treat your body can respond to those things in a positive or negative way. Your mental outlook itself, whether or not you're focusing on the good. And I think emotional too. I think when it comes to what does your heart really want? I mean, if you wake up and you know that God gave you that day, you're going to feel this renewed energy to tackle that day. So I hate to be that guy and say it's all three, but it is really and truly. It's kind of this trifecta. It's something that all three, they're interdependent. You can't just rely on physical energy and hope that mental and emotional energy kind of pay off too, and vice versa. You can't just wake up and lie to yourself and say, I'm happy, when you're super out of shape and you feel like you're having health problems because of that. So I think it's across the board, all three.
So for physical energy, for emotional, and for mental, what's one thing that boosts your energy in all three of those categories?
I definitely think exercise for the physical aspect. I think that's something that by hopping on a treadmill or by lifting weights, that's something that allows your body to feel some sense of accomplishment. I think when it comes to the mental aspect, I think it's truly trying to remind yourself that you are doing well in this life, that you are trying, and even just you're on this never-ending cycle of trying to learn. So for me, the mental aspect is being a lifelong learner. Like you're trying to learn new things and also be confident in what you are, like having that degree of self-confidence. And then I think the emotional aspect, I would have to tie in spiritual to that as well.
Yes.
I think that when you do start off the day with some type of like spiritual enrichment, that can change your outlook on that day as well. So I hope that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense.
Okay.
What's the biggest drain on your energy?
Oh my goodness. Doing something that does not align with your goals.
Yeah.
I think that's really tough. I had a principal who actually had me complete this thing called a planning wheel, and I'll have to show you some time, but if you picture a piece of paper, you have these 4 boxes, and it's like a cycle, and they all build on each other. The first box says, where are we? The second box is, where do we want to go? And then the third box is, are we on track? And then the fourth one is, how will we get there? And I think that I've had to kind of go through these planning wheels on occasion. By doing those, you kind of understand where your trajectory is overall. Like, for example, my goal is to be a high school principal one day, or middle school principal, either one. And if I'm over here spending time being a cross-country coach, not that that experience is totally irrelevant, I'm kind of pulling away from that experience altogether. So I think by thinking through your goals altogether and kind of knowing like where you're going and what you want to do, I think that really spares your energy altogether.
I want to change courses for you.
Okay.
Caffeine, a nice cup of coffee in the morning is a great way to wake up, in my opinion. I don't drink that much caffeine, honestly. Like maybe like 1 cup a week or so.
Sure.
How do you feel about caffeine?
I think it should be a supplement, not a requirement. I think that anybody who relies on caffeine for energy, I think they are inherently lazy, and I'll just boldly say it.
Okay.
I think there are other ways to regain your energy than relying on some type of like stimulant like that overall.
And what about naps?
I don't think we're meant to take naps as human beings. I don't think so, because I think that if you really think about it, like for example, if a farmer takes a moment out of the day in the heat of the sun or even in the season, like he's losing an opportunity to continue sowing seed or even reap his harvest. I just have never really thought that naps have been useful. I mean, I know there's some like scientific studies that go behind like cat naps and REM cycles, but I personally have always found, like for me personally, if I take a nap, my sleep at night is just totally wrecked. If I go to bed at 10 p.m., I'm going to bed at midnight because of that little 20-minute nap. It just throws me off.
Really?
So,
okay. See, I've found for me personally that it makes me a lot more productive right after.
Yeah.
If I'm ever feeling sluggish, set a 20-minute timer, just take a 20-minute nap, get right back to it full speed afterwards. And for me, it works. And I mean, I haven't noticed anything with Sleep loss, but I know I'll look into that. Would you say that laziness stems from a lack of energy?
I think of all 12 or 13 questions you gave me, I think this one was my favorite one because I think if that is the mindset that laziness is a product of low energy, then I think that I think we would kind of be like mindless, lazy robots. I really do think that when it comes to being lazy, I think more often than not, it's almost a choice, it's a desire, and it's almost like the absence of living an intentional life, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think overall, laziness is truly a choice where you have an option to either get action, get after something, invest your time in something worthwhile doing, or you're just embracing like literally nothingness. So, because you're going to be battling low energy at times, especially when you're a father, when you're a husband, or when you're grinding at work, trying to get something done, you're going to feel that. And so I want to refute that idea that when you experience low energy, you're automatically lazy. I think it's more so when you have low energy, you got to really turn it on the opposite. You have to really fight against that overall.
And how do you fight against that?
I think it's like we talked about earlier. You've got to know your goals. You've got to actually want to fight against it. And you've got to know kind of your purpose of why you're living in that moment. I think one thing I often find is people are not being intentional with their lives at all. I see this a lot in my students. They just kind of wake up, they go to school, go home, go to bed, and do it all again. I think that if people were more intentional, they would find themselves being less lazy on a daily basis.
Okay.
However, I also think there's nothing wrong with relaxing though. Like we go on vacation to get away from that. And I think that there's a huge difference between being lazy versus being relaxed. And I think lazy is where you have something to do, but you're choosing not to do it versus relaxing is you know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it.
So let me ask you this. How do you know when you need to rest versus when you need to push through?
That's a great question. I think it's a matter of you personally measuring the importance of what needs to be done and how quickly it needs to be done. You know, for example, if I've got a massive paper that I've got to write for whatever reason overnight, then obviously the urgency is pretty high and the importance is pretty high. But I think that really and truly, when you do come to a crossroads where you're trying to make that decision of do I turn off my energy now and just kind of let it be, or do I need to grind through this? I think it is measuring literally like, does this need to be done now and how much time do I have?
So we all wake up in the morning. You have this like certain amount of energy. How do we channel that into productivity? Because it's really easy to take that energy and push it towards, whatever, social media or just something not productive, or to just not get out of bed. Yep. And then you feel all slumpy and tired because you didn't get out of bed on time. How do we really channel that energy that we're given and turn it into productivity?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. And I think a lot of this conversation concerning energy can also be translated into a conversation about time management as well. I know in Ephesians 5:16, Paul talks about making the best use of your time. And I think that the more intentional you are with how you spend your time, you'll find that that energy will naturally kind of make its way towards doing things that matter. Have you ever heard of the story of the pickle jar analogy and the professor in the auditorium and the big rocks and all that?
Yes.
Yeah. So that whole idea of how you have this jar, you put in the rocks, then the pebbles, and then the sand. I think that when you learn to identify what is most important to you, whether that's your faith, your family, or your focus on work, you're going to automatically, and sometimes I think subconsciously, kind of focus your energy towards those things because you're doing things that matter in your own mind. So I think that people who do not actually kind of label their big rock, so to speak, are at risk of spending time doing things that don't matter. Whereas those who actually know kind of why they're waking up that day, either to provide for their family, carry out God's gospel and His kingdom, I think the truth is like you're going to channel that energy towards things that do matter when you do know your identified big rocks, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right. So I got one last question for you. And this is one I've felt recently. I had this project at work where I was like organizing this whole big section of like nails, and I was trying to get it all done. I spent like 8 hours on that thing over multiple shifts. And I was getting really drained by the end of it. By the end of like 5 hours straight on working of it, I like could barely even like think about another nail. And so my question to you is, when you're deep into a mentally demanding task, what are your strategies for staying focused?
Have you ever seen that movie Field of Dreams? It's an old baseball movie.
No.
Came out in the late like 1980s, and there's a phrase that they say in the movie. Just to kind of give you some context, you have Kevin Costner, he is the owner of this massive farm, and he keeps hearing this voice say, if you build it, they will come, talking about building a baseball field.
Mm-hmm.
So if you build the field, the players will just show up automatically, and it actually does happen in the movie. And I think concerning your question, I think when you are trying to kind of recollect your thoughts and regain your focus and keep your focus, I think it's that same principle of if you build an environment of focus, that success and that energy will follow that automatically. So for example, I know me personally, I at work cannot have my door open when I'm really trying to focus on something, because I'll have someone come by and say, hey, which is super nice and I appreciate that, but it's something that can like wildly throw off my game. It's like, not that I have ADD or ADHD, but sometimes I've found that if I don't set myself up for success, if I don't put myself in an environment where I feel like I can really focus, then that's something that'll just throw the entire thing off. And there have been times where I feel like if I just can't achieve that level of focus, then I'll actually just kind of give up for the moment, and then I'll try another time, just knowing that I can't really put myself in a situation where I can be successful. So it's all about the environment, just putting yourself in an environment where you feel like I can focus here and I can channel my energy towards things that matter.
All right. Well, that's all the questions I had for you today. I want to move into some application just for a few minutes. So the thing about this podcast is it's about maturing. It's about people my age, or even people, 50 years old, trying to fix some problems they have in their lives. For me, it's more about just becoming more of a man. And so I want to ask you, for someone who is struggling with this idea of having more energy, what are some things they can do, or just the number one thing that they need to be working on to have more energy?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, your life is kind of like a ship in an ocean of stress, in an ocean of pressure, in an ocean of opportunities. And I think that when you find out your why in this life, whether it be a faith reason or why you want to embrace masculinity or become a true man, I think your why acts like the rudder on that ship. That, I mean, your boat is going to get tossed left and right, because I'll be honest, as a married man who's been in his career for 9 years, there are times where if I didn't know my why, if I really didn't know my purpose, I don't know that I would be sitting here having this conversation with you. So I think that at the root of all things, when you know your why, I think the how of becoming a man becomes easier. So I would say that my why is that God created me. He woke me up today, and I have a job to do. And I think it's Proverbs 21:31. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. And I have always thought about, when it comes to my why on this earth, is that God has done his part, and now it's time for me to do my part. And I think that that's the missing piece, is that is what true masculinity looks like, is that when you're meeting God halfway.
We'll start on the rapid fire questions. So what's one habit you can't live with?
Exercise. I feel like that has been one that has really kind of allowed me to clear my mind. And the unfortunate thing is I broke my foot back in June and have not been able to run since then. I think we've kind of talked about that, but I would argue that has been the healthiest habit that I've ever built.
Okay, that makes sense. What's one thing you've learned from a failure?
Oh, man. So I coach cross country, and we were about 4 hours from home down at Jekyll Island. And as a coach, there's often times where you have to make a lot of challenging calls, sometimes in the best interest of an athlete, sometimes in the best interest of a team, whatever. But I say 4 hours to kind of emphasize the point that we are way from home. And this one athlete walks up to me 15 minutes before go time, and she says, hey, I don't have my jersey. And this was somebody who had repeatedly been forgetting like water bottles, clothes at practice. And so I finally thought, okay, that's it. I'm going to go ahead and hold the line here. And I ended up not letting her run. And her parents just gave me the hardest time about that for the rest of the season. And I think the lesson that I learned from that, I kind of made a rash decision on not letting her run when her parents had driven 4 hours and I spent $400 on a hotel, when I probably could have given her some kind of consequence different from that. And it's kind of one thing that haunts me sometimes. So I think that's one mistake I've made before that still sticks with me overall. So
you wish you had thought through it a little more?
A little bit, but it's hard. I didn't have a lot of time to think about that. And I think if she had not been on this trajectory of forgetting things, I think I might have given her some more grace. But I just thought this has to stop, and I figured that would be the day.
All right, and with that, we now conclude this episode of the Grown Ups Table podcast. I thank everyone so much for listening, and I invite you back next time for an episode about excellence. That's all for now.